One of the facts of American life these days is that many prescription drugs are now household names.
Both doctors and the public want to reach for the newest prescription drug.
You can't sit down to TV at night and not see a half a dozen drug company commercials.
Millions of Americans watch the ads and then ask their doctors for prescriptions.
The reason we're seeing so much consumer advertising is because it works.
They do it by telling people, ask your doctor.
They can sell us almost anything.
The companies that make up the pharmaceutical industry are among the largest corporations in the world. In 2004, their combined global sales were over $500 billion, with Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson leading the pack. Together, these businesses have come to be known as Big Pharma. In the U.S., the core of Big Pharma's immense profits is from sales of prescription medication. And since these drugs can only be prescribed by medical professionals, most of the industry's promotional and marketing activities are directed at doctors, pharmacists, and other healthcare providers. The companies of Big Pharma hope these campaigns will lead to new prescriptions for their brands. In recent years, Big Pharma has pushed its way into the traditional doctor-patient relationship and found a new way to increase sales by targeting patients directly and independently, largely through television advertising.
Do you know about the purple pill called Nexium?
I know.
I know.
You should know about it too.
Between 1996 and 2004, industry spending on direct-to-consumer advertising, or DTC, rose over 500%. Now, even before walking into their doctor's offices, patients have already been exposed to millions of dollars worth of persuasive advertising that encourages them to ask their doctor how a particular brand of drug might help them.
Ask your doctor about adding Plavix.
Ask your doctor if Zelnorm is right for you.
Ask your doctor if a free sample of Viagra is right for you.
I asked my doctor about Lipitor. Have you?
In this new landscape, the most vital question for American consumers is this: how might the influence of one of the most powerful for-profit industries in the world affect the way we think about our health and well-being?
With Celebrex, I will play the long version.
Ask your doctor if Celebrex is right for you.
As these pharmaceutical companies move prescription drugs into the consumer arena, as they become consumer products, they advertise them quite differently. And what they do is rely on all the same practices and conventions of conventional product advertising.
It's so good to have my enthusiasm back.
I'm enjoying things again. And it's because of Enbrel.
They began trying to create brand identities for these products. What branding is about is trying to create an emotional bond between a consumer and a product, which is a very different kind of relationship than we've ever had to our medications before.
Any doctor can tell you about patients that come in with a list of medications that they want. They clearly all came from advertisement that they see on TV. And if you watch the evening news, for example, it's all advertisement for prescription drugs.
What's the weekend hold in store for you? Ask your doctor if a free sample of prescription Cialis is right for you.
The patients come in asking for things they don't even know what it's for, right? Women who are coming in asking for Cialis or Viagra or other things, and they don't even know what they're for.
So this becomes not a rational reason for taking a medication. This is not so much about the efficacy of the drug, but about our emotional response to the kinds of social meanings they have attached to that product.
Join the millions of people with asthma who have discovered Singulair.
I just want to play. Play! You have these ads that are sort of ephemeral kind of images unfolding before you.
And to me, they seem like perfume ads or sort of something that's all about image, that's all about emotional impact.
Most of what you get in these ads are these incredibly compelling lifestyle portraits of people who are living healthy, vibrant lives thanks to pharmaceuticals. You don't really ever see the medical condition represented. You don't see people suffering from the ailment that they supposedly suffer from. You see them restored to health after they've taken the chemical.
The pleasing tones and images of these ads are often at odds with the less pleasurable list of side effects that companies by law are required to recite.
Side effects include itching, rash, diarrhea, and bruising.
Dry mouth, sweating, nausea,
headache, flu, runny nose, and ear infection.
If you take Wellbutrin XL, there is a risk you may have a seizure.
Erections lasting longer than 4 hours, though rare, require immediate medical help.
So I think one of the things that gets misrepresented by these ads is the safety of the drugs. While you get the major statement about risks, you get an incomplete picture of the drugs. These drugs are not as safe or effective as the ads suggest they are.
According to Otis Lee Elliott's cardiologist, it's not his high cholesterol that put him in the hospital, it's the medicine he took to lower it.
Adverse drug reactions, reactions that happen even though the medication has been properly prescribed, are the 5th leading cause of death in the United States.
In fact, each year in the United States, adverse drug reactions cause an estimated 100,000 deaths and approximately 1.5 million hospitalizations. The withdrawal of the popular painkiller Vioxx from the market is a salient example of the magnitude of this problem.
Merck said today that data from a clinical trial found an increased risk for heart attack and stroke.
The arthritis drug may have caused 160,000 heart attacks and strokes.
20 million Americans took Vioxx.
Vioxx relieves arthritis pain.
Often, some say, unnecessarily, in response to advertising.
Vioxx is a superb example of what happens when you over-promote a drug, when doctors especially over-prescribe a drug as a concept of promotion and give it to people who it's not indicated for, who they could have been given very cheap older drugs which would have been worked just as well. And then because the drug's only out for a few years, you then discover when it's used in lots and lots of people that it has side effects, some of them fatal, that you didn't know about.
Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Vioxx.
And in 2000, more money was spent promoting Vioxx than Anheuser-Busch spent promoting Budweiser, than Pepsi-Cola spent promoting Pepsi. I mean, that's a lot of money.
The industry group Pharma defends direct-to-consumer drug ads, saying they educate the public and get patients to doctors for treatment.
I almost feel sorry for people who try to defend the advertising as education because it's so preposterous. I mean, come on. You know, is it education when Nike, advertises its shoes? Like, now you know how to, cover up your feet and get from point A to point B. That is not what a 30-second television ad of beautiful people playing in the flowers does. Also, it's self-evidently absurd to look to a company for impartial, critical education about a product it sells.
The thing is, we're not talking about whether a patient is drinking one cola versus the other. I think very few people would care if their grandmother drank Pepsi because she was being diluted by the advertising, right? Or they just had better commercials. And I think because we're talking about patients' health, that it's a very, very, very important issue.
Based on the sheer number of drug ads on television, it would be natural to assume that the industry is constantly creating new and improved drugs. But we might also ask, are these new drugs really more effective than those already on the market?
When the drug companies test their drugs and submit their evidence to the FDA to get approval, they don't have to compare the new drugs with old drugs to treat the same condition. They just have to compare their new drugs with a placebo, a sugar pill, which means that all they are really showing is that the new drug is better than nothing.
Due to lax government regulation, prescription drugs end up flooding the market. A powerful example of this new market saturation is the exploding number of allergy medications.
Allergies used to take the fun out of games. Now, I'm cleared and clear.
The most successful new drug in this class was Claritin, a blockbuster that earned more than $3 billion in its best year. Other companies strongly push their own prescription antihistamines in order to garner a piece of this lucrative allergy market.
Yesterday, allergies took you out of it. Today, Allegra can help bring you back.
You know about Allegra, but you should know about Allegra D. It just may be music to your ears.
I looked at the last 7 years, 1998 through 2004, and during those years, only 14% of newly approved drugs were actual new chemical compounds classified as being likely to be better than drugs already sold. Most new drugs, ostensibly new drugs, were just old chemical compounds, not likely to be any better than anything on the market. These are called Me Too drugs.
It's not difficult to create a Me Too drug, and it's not expensive to create a Me Too drug. It's expensive to make novel compounds, because for every one drug, there are 2,000 drugs that fail. But for every one drug that's a Me Too, you're batting 1,000 when you make a Me Too drug.
What the drug companies are doing now is concentrating on lifestyle drugs that can be marketed to vast numbers of people, and the market can be easily expanded.
When diet and exercise aren't enough, adding Lipitor can help lower your bad cholesterol from 39 to 60%.
Let me give you an example. The top-selling drug in the world now is Lipitor, Pfizer's Lipitor. This is a drug of the statin type to lower cholesterol. But it's a Me Too drug. It's the fourth of 6 very similar statin drugs now on the market.
I needed to lower my cholesterol. My doctor told me about Zocor.
Vytorin treats the 2 sources of cholesterol. Crestor, along with diet, can lower bad cholesterol by up to 52%.
There's a lot of debate about whether we benefit as a public from having 5 different statins that the industry devotes a whole lot of money to promoting in order to compete with each other.
The marketing goes mainly to convince people that one Me Too drug is better than another, despite the lack of any evidence on that score.
Once one company starts to advertise its product and creates what's called brand awareness of its product, it's got the Campbell's soup or the Nike. Another company that wants to promote its drug feels it can't afford to stay on the sidelines. So it creates this sort of vicious circle where everybody's advertising.
The feeling of asking your doctor about Viagra.
For example, the Viagras of the world. In 1994, $265 million a year went to consumer advertising. In 2004, in the first 5 months of 2004, the same amount of money went to advertise only erectile dysfunction drugs.
If a relaxing moment turns into the right moment, will you be ready? You can be with Cialis.
More and more men are making the move to Levitra. Maybe it's time you discovered what all the excitement's about.
When we pay the higher and higher prices for drugs, that's the cost that we in the United States are paying for.
This marketing is the real name of the game. They've become vast marketing machines now. And if you could stop the Me Too market, you would stop the promotional activities to a large extent.
Nexium.
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 People are asking their doctors about it. And if you call 1-800-4NEXIUM, you'll learn about a free trial offer.
Today's purple pill is Nexium.
Nexium, the new purple pill, is probably the prime example of how the pharmaceutical industry can sell anything. They can take an old drug and they can sell it as a new drug. Nexium is really the same thing as Prilosec.
It's Prilosec time. Time to see your doctor about America's most prescribed acid control medicine.
In the early 1990s, Prilosec burst onto the scene as an innovative prescription drug to treat heartburn. When Prilosec's maker faced the expiration of its patent, it knew it was about to lose its exclusive right to market the drug. Gene Carbona, a sales rep for Prilosec during this time, explains one way the company addressed this challenge.
We were going to be losing $6 billion a year in revenue, and we knew that that was going to have a very strong effect on our company's bottom line, and our company had to answer to the shareholders and the other members. So what they did is they licensed in a drug that was very, very similar, being Nexium.
Now the makers of Prilosec introduced their new purple pill, Nexium.
There's only one specific difference. It's got one little S isomer, and other than that, it's the same exact drug. It inhibits about the same amount of acid. It's got about the same side effect profile. It's basically the same thing, and it's also purple. In the final 2 years of promotion, we were trained on how to cannibalize our existing market share over to Nexium, even while we still had responsibility for Prilosec.
Across America, doctors who specialize in acid reflux disease have switched more patients to the purple pill, Nexium, than to any other prescription of its kind.
By 2004, the popular purple pill was available in 3 almost identical versions, but priced at vastly different amounts, ranging from $24 a month for over-the-counter Prilosec to $171 for the new prescription drug Nexium.
No amount of hard, cold facts about this drug could hold back its progress in the American marketplace. And it's a good example of how broken and corrupt our marketplace really is, because it simply started advertising to the consumer, pushing this new drug to doctors, dropping samples. It became the most advertised drug product in the United States, and it's hugely successful. And the fact that there's both an over-the-counter version of Prilosec and a generic version available makes no difference, because our system has no way of shedding any light on this for the basic consumer.
It's a classic campaign, very successful, and there are other manufacturers that are out there that know that their products are going off shelf life and promoting not generics, but they're promoting their new branded product, which is almost the same.
It's remarkable what this industry is able to do and how they're able to create images of drugs as either being new or more effective or safer than older drugs, when all of the underlying information points totally in the opposite direction.
Your blood pressure may have gone from normal to high overnight. New government guidelines mean millions need a checkup. Do you?
At the same time that drug advertising is pushing people to their doctors, experts are busy redefining what it means to be sick.
All you have to do is change the definition of high blood pressure, and you can increase that market by tens of millions of people, or change the definition of high cholesterol.
If you didn't have a cholesterol problem yesterday, you may have one now.
The new guidelines call for a huge boost in use of cholesterol-lowering drugs known as statins. The new numbers mean millions of Americans may be taking statin drugs for the rest of their lives.
In some cases, it is a question of, hey, more people are getting treated for this, and this is great. In some cases, even more people should get treated, probably. But what's always muddying the waters here is that a major source of information to consumers and to doctors alike is the industry that stands to profit from these medicines.
The guidelines were written by 9 experts on cholesterol. The National Institutes of Health, which sponsored the report, now says 6 of them have financial ties, such as speaking fees, research grants, or other funds with drug companies which make the most widely used medications.
In recent years, Big Pharma has begun promoting more than just its treatments and products. Drug companies now increasingly advertise health conditions themselves. As a result, Big Pharma normalizes even the most obscure health disorders and presents them as common.
It's frustrating. Just when you're ready to relax, that's when it happens. The urge to move, along with uncomfortable sensations in your legs. They're hard to describe, but they can even keep you from getting to sleep. You feel the urgent need to get up and move, just to get some relief. There's a name for it: restless leg syndrome. And if you have it, you're among the nearly 1 in 10 U.S. adults who do. Want to know more? Visit restlesslegs.com or talk to your doctor.
Of all the things that industry does, this is probably the one thing that I think could be labeled as evil, that in order to make a profit, you're disease mongering, in other words, making population, medicalizing something that is just really part of everyday life.
You often feel distracted, disorganized, restless, unable to finish things. Like the channel keeps changing in your mind and you can't control the remote.
You guys have any thoughts?
If you felt these symptoms your whole life, you may have adult ADD.
So in other words, a person who is not yet a patient, who is actually feeling quite good, sits down to watch the evening news, and after seeing a few commercials, says to him or herself, you know, I'm not quite as healthy as I thought.
Got to remember that appointment tomorrow. Did I send the car payment? What made me volunteer for that assignment?
Introducing Lunesta, a sleep aid that can give you and your restless mind the sleep you need.
You have this huge phenomenon then, a huge increase in prescriptions, and there's this debate about what is this problem? You know, has it always been around? Is it a problem of behavior? Is it really a biomedical problem?
What's happened now is you've taken a healthy person and medicalized something that was not medical, and this person may very soon end up on prescription medication.
At work, I'm tense about stuff at home. At home, I'm tense about stuff at work.
If you're one of the millions of people who live with uncontrollable worry, anxiety, and several of these symptoms for 6 months or more, you could be suffering from generalized anxiety disorder and a chemical imbalance.
Because patent life can be extended if new indications are approved, companies are constantly searching for new diseases to treat with old drugs. Antidepressants of the Prozac variety, or SSRIs, are a good example of this practice. Originally approved for major depressive disorder, these drugs are now prescribed for a variety of mood and anxiety disorders. Each new indication approved promises increased profits and must therefore be promoted heavily to the public. A striking example is how Paxil was revitalized as a treatment for social anxiety disorder. Its company hired a public relations firm to frame this condition as a major and common medical problem, and the firm launched a multifaceted campaign that moved beyond advertising to get stories about social anxiety disorder placed in print media and on television.
This morning we begin a special two-part series on social anxiety disorder. Many of us have suffered from shyness or fear of social situations at some point in our lives, but for millions of Americans, their anxiety can be debilitating.
Paxil's award-winning product director was quoted as saying, "Every marketer's dream is to find an unidentified or unknown market and develop it. That's what we were able to do with social anxiety disorder."
What it is, what it feels like, what it is, what it feels like, what it is. We know what social anxiety can feel like, and Paxil can help.
When people begin to critique these advertisements and these campaigns, I think it's a little easy to actually forget about the people who do suffer from social anxiety disorder, who suffer from major depression, who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorders. You know, there are people who suffer from these conditions and whose lives are radically transformed by the medications, and I think that it's actually important to remember that. That doesn't mean that at the same time we're not sort of creating a culture of the worried well. People who might have this problem are sort of suddenly concerned that they have this problem.
Over 10 million Americans suffer. Do you?
If we take shyness, which is probably a part of the personality of most of us, in some situations, you know, it's an appealing part of people, it's part of their personality. And we turn it into a new entity and we call it social anxiety disorder. Now you've increased the size of the market. Now you can go out and you can advertise Paxil for social anxiety disorder, for somebody being shy.
The Paxil CR ad reads to me a little bit like medicalizing normal experience.
If you are one of the many who suffer from overwhelming anxiety and intense fear of social situations with unfamiliar people, now there's Paxil CR. Paxil CR helps relieve the symptoms of social anxiety disorder all day, so the real you can come through.
You have people who look mostly comfortable, but they're a little uncomfortable in a social setting, and we're turning that into a condition that needs significant treatment. The SSRIs have a million side effects. They're not clean drugs, and to suggest that if you have a tough time going into a meeting and introducing yourself to people, you should be on an SSRI, I think is problematic.
We are going to take a closer look tonight at the possible link between antidepressants and suicide.
The other disturbing aspect of this class of antidepressants was the fact that these drugs were being prescribed to a large number of children.
About 1 million children under 18 take such drugs now, with doctors writing 3 times as many prescriptions as they did a decade ago.
And we don't know if the drugs were being used appropriately, if they were being used in children with major depressive disorder, or they were being used on a 12 or a 14-year-old boy that didn't make the football or the basketball team, and he felt sad.
So you have this kind of system that has no brain. It has profit as its goal, and it has no mind, and it just builds the market without thinking about, are there other ways we can deal with this? Is this something we want to pathologize? Is it something we want to see as a sickness?
Critics have pointed to Prozac's reintroduction as Sarafem as one of the most disturbing examples of how companies simply promote new conditions in order to repackage old drugs.
It's that week before your period. The irritability, mood swings, bloating. Think it's PMS. It could be PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Those intense...
What Eli Lilly was very successful in doing to expand its market on Prozac was to essentially recolor it. Instead of a green capsule, made it pink, rename it Sarafem, and get approval to market it for premenstrual tension, which it called premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
Drug manufacturer Eli Lilly launched a $30 million marketing campaign to inform women about their new drug that promises relief.
The problem is Sarafem is not new, and the condition it's being advertised to treat might not even exist.
Prozac and Sarafem are exactly the same thing. It's all a matter of image.
Sarafem, the first and only prescription medication for PMDD.
Once again, the pharmaceutical industry, through its advertising ingenuity, is able to sell us almost anything, even old drugs as new drugs.
A lot of women would really be outraged if they knew that they were just taking good old Prozac, same dose, but priced, at my drugstore anyway, over 3 times as much as generic Prozac.
Fueling the debate, Sarafem's marketing blitz started just before Eli Lilly lost its exclusive patent to sell Prozac, a drug that generates $2 billion in sales each year. With Sarafem, the company obtained a new patent, and for now they are the only company that can market a treatment for PMDD.
This whole process of creating disease awareness is controversial, and I think it's sort of a question that we should decide as a society. And what bothers me about it is that it's being promoted by an industry that has its own motivations, which have nothing to do with our culture or our physical well-being or really our health as a society.
I can't help but think that there are millions of Americans who are taking drugs that they probably don't need and may be even harmful. That they're being convinced, and their doctors are being convinced, that they should take lifelong drugs that probably are of no net benefit and may be of net harm.
Clearly, in our culture, we tend to look for quick fixes and pills that can, and this has really been the emphasis, whether we're talking about obesity or any other health problems. Certainly the direct-to-consumer advertising feeds on this.
We don't look at environmental problems that might be causing asthma or causing these allergies. We don't look at lifestyle issues that might be causing depression or causing, indigestion and so forth, or erectile dysfunction for that matter. Instead, we just sort of talk about it at the level of individual biology. And so that means we're not looking at social causes. It means we're also then not looking for social solutions.
I think it's very important for patients, in a sense, to give their doctor permission not to prescribe a drug by saying to the doctor, no, I don't want a drug unless I really need a drug. And then if the doctor, who will be taken aback by this, says, well, yes, I really do think you need a drug, then it's up to the patient, or I think the patient should say, is there something, even though this is a free sample, and I may use this free sample until it runs out, is there a drug for the same condition that's cheaper, or is there a generic?
You really need to be your own advocate, and you need to be educated, and that means spending a lot of time doing research about any medication that you're going to take, any healthcare procedure that you're going to undergo.
Consumers really need something to protect themselves. We look at our publications, Worst Pills, Best Pills, as a source of information for prescription drug consumers. Not only do we do a book, a newsletter called Worst Pills, Best Pills News, but we now have a website to give people objective comparative information so that they can decide for themselves, so they have something to balance the advertising.
Groups like Public Citizen have been working tirelessly to arm consumers with important information. Also necessary, say advocates, are campaigns to tackle the industry's mass targeting of our healthcare providers. While direct-to-consumer advertising remains the most visible aspect of the drug industry's overall marketing approach, the real story lies behind the television screens. Invisible to most consumers, the majority of pharmaceutical promotion is still directed at medical professionals. Increasingly, drug companies are pushing their brands at medical conferences and in medical journals. In addition, there are close to 100,000 industry sales representatives who spend countless hours visiting hospitals and physicians' offices and leaving behind branded items to remind both doctor and patient who they are and what they're selling.
Anyone who's been a patient or has ever set foot in a doctor's office know that the offices are just flooded from clocks, pens, coffee mugs, calendars with branded drug names on them. In fact, if you pulled over any medical resident or medical student who was wearing a white coat, and there have been studies that have done this, likely almost all of the things in their pockets would be branded products, whether it's from their pen, their stethoscope tag, compass, other things that they use for medical purposes. And so the most obvious thing about that is that doctors and students even are walking advertisements, really saying these things are okay, advertising for these products, which is really, that's a problem in itself. And then, of course, the other problem, which I consider even the primary problem, is that they're receiving gifts from company and therefore developing relationships with the companies.
You get cases and cases of pens and cases of stethoscopes and things like that that are all within the AMA and Pharma guidelines. But you also have a budget that pretty much is unrestricted.
Doctors now, their morale is fairly low. Managed care is causing a lot of problems for them. They're being treated now as just one more vendor in some respects. And the drug company salespeople treat them with terrific respect.
This starts out at the first day of medical school, and in many medical schools, even the incoming students that are 2 years away from seeing a patient will start to get gifts from the pharmaceutical industry. And as these students get farther along in their medical education, the interactions and the gifts escalate to free lunches, to dinners, to trips.
No matter where you spend money in pharmaceutical promotion, whether it's within sample distribution, educational programming, non-educational programming, champagne, brunches, happy hours, New York jet tickets, no matter where you spend the money, you make money. And my boss always told me, don't worry about it, there'll always be more funding. Spend what you can. In fact, if I give you $100,000 to spend, Gene, I want you to spend $200,000.
Certain activities that would be illegal if they were called marketing are not illegal if they're called education. There's a safe harbor for them. For example, it's illegal to give kickbacks to doctors to prescribe your drug. But if you're essentially paying them to educate other doctors or to be educated by other doctors, then it's no longer a kickback.
You can hide anything under educational. You can you can hide 18 holes of golf for 50 people under an educational event. And during those 18 holes, you can give a case of scotch that costs $1,000 to each one of the recipients of this free golf round. You can give golf clubs to individuals, and it's all under educational. So when the drug company says, oh no, we don't spend money on those promotions anymore, it's all educational, I know for a fact that anybody that played golf with me got a $300 putter, and my bosses never saw that on the expense form because it went under education.
All kinds of things with a sort of thin educational veneer over them. That's where I think the lion's share of their marketing money goes. And they get what they pay for. I mean, they're not charities. They track very carefully what doctors prescribe before and after they attend one of these events. And they know that the prescriptions for the company drug go up.
Obviously, that drug company that I talked about, that the powers that be will say, this is not the case, this is the exception and not the rule, this is the way it used to be. Well, that's baloney. Again, I've got very close contacts still in the industry, and I'll get phone calls once a week. Listen, I've got $35,000 to spend this month. How can I do it? Give me something that won't look so bad that, but I need to spend the money. I need to spend.
In addition to providing gifts and trips, perhaps the most potent weapon in the drug rep's arsenal is free drug samples, usually accompanied by supporting literature. In 2004, the industry gave away the retail equivalent of almost $16 billion worth of drugs, and these products are the chief enabler of the marketing machine.
On the one hand, you have the consumer advertising, so the consumer is sort of prepared by having seen this on TV. On the other hand, you have the doctor who's been prepared by the rep, and you also have that sample. Those sort of things all meet together, and the consumer goes in and says, I have this problem, and I saw this ad, and the doctor says, oh, I have this study that somebody dropped off about this, and in fact, here's the drug. And that momentum is unbeatable, essentially. And it works, even if there are people out there saying, hey, actually there was a federal agency that said that's not the right drug to take, that's actually not the most cost-effective drug. None of that stuff matters because that apparatus I just described is so powerful.
And what it is a way of getting both patients and physicians hooked on their product, which is always the newest, most expensive product on the market.
You don't see generic drug companies out there sampling generic drugs that cost $3 a month. In any town USA, you walk into a physician's office and you walk into a room that's usually a 10 by 10 room full of hundreds of thousands of dollars of samples. They're all the most expensive branded drugs. These are drugs that cost upwards of $100 to $300 a month, and the office is full of them.
A physician prescribing the appropriate medication is not necessarily what the industry needs. What the industry needs, or a particular company, is the physician prescribing their medication. And this is the same issue that applies to the rep speaking with a doctor, who the reps will say they're educating doctors, but of course what they're trying to do is promote their products and get the doctor to prescribe their product.
Physicians will say that the journal ads and the television commercials and the drug rep visits and the lunches and the pens and the pads and the pizza have no effect on them whatsoever. And they'll also say that although it has no effect on them, that it most definitely has an effect on their colleagues. I knew as an industry insider that whatever I did affected my market share.
All the literature that's looked at this shows, not surprisingly, that doctors are influenced by promotion, that the more they meet with reps, the more legitimate they think the information they're getting from reps, the more likely they're prescribed more expensive medication, for example, more inappropriate medication.
Increasing numbers of physicians are now breaking the silence around these issues. They're refusing to meet with drug reps and working to expose Big Pharma's influence on the medical profession.
More and more doctors are becoming outraged with ceaseless mass marketing from the drug companies. Doctors and medical students across the country today took a stand.
Doctors, medical students, and even former industry insiders are raising public awareness through the media, while at the same time organizing within the medical community to challenge the industry's promotional practices.
I'm working with AMSA, which is the American Medical Student Association. AMSA has 60,000 medical students from all over the country, and what they're working on is this big farm-free campaign, pharmaceutical-free. And they believe that although drug companies are needed, drug reps are not needed.
And one of the biggest problems has been that nobody was talking about it, that the hidden curriculum was accepting all these gifts okay because the teachers and everybody else were doing it. But there was no other message, and what we've been trying to do now is to get medical schools to explicitly and formally in the curricula themselves in the medical schools to talk to students about this and discuss the ethical and professional issues involved.
In 1999, Bob Goodman created the nonprofit No Free Lunch to help educate healthcare providers, the public, and especially medical students about these issues.
We have a pledge for physicians as well as other healthcare providers to take, which essentially says that they won't accept gifts or other promotional materials, that they'll practice on the basis of the scientific literature. And many patients do email me asking me if there's a physician in their area that has taken the pledge. So it is my hope that eventually that one of the things when the managed care organizations have their list of doctors and says whether they're board certified and they speak English and Spanish and have they taken the No Free Lunch pledge, that there'll be a yes or no on that for patients to choose them.
Advocates for reform are also moving beyond this focus on individual physicians and patients to argue for more fundamental systemic changes.
Well, in a sense, you can't blame the drug companies for doing what they're doing. These are, after all, investor-owned businesses whose fiduciary responsibility is to maximize the value of their shareholders' stock, that is, to increase profits any way they can. I think my greatest criticism would come for the institutions that have allowed themselves to be corrupted by the drug companies.
Sadly, it appears that our federal government has been really extensively co-opted by the industry, and I'm really not a person given to sort of cynicism or conspiracy theories about this sort of thing, but many people in Congress have said they've got a stranglehold on us.
They get into all the Capitol Hills in every state in the country and in Washington, D.C., and they're spending billions of dollars trying to create legislation that's either going to protect the industry or to help promote the industry.
That's one of the things that the industry does with its vast wealth. It buys influence, and it also uses its wealth to co-opt any institution that might be expected to stand in the way of its drive for profits. So it co-opts, first of all, the U.S. Congress. It gives generously to political campaigns. It has the largest lobby in Washington. Nothing goes through Congress that it hasn't approved. So it begins with U.S. Congress, and then through the U.S. Congress and the administration, it controls to a remarkable extent the FDA.
We need the FDA. The basic structure and the idea behind the Food and Drug Administration was in the public's interest, and I think the framework is there. What's missing is that there has been no oversight, and Congress has allowed the industry to become the FDA's partner in the development of new drugs.
Some senators said the FDA shares the blame.
One of my concerns is that the FDA has a relationship with drug companies that is far too cozy.
The incentives that we have in our healthcare system and kind of healthcare as a business and all aspects of it, business are really kind of perverse in the sense of how we should be thinking about the public's health.
I think the public is becoming very disillusioned. They're no longer believing that this is a miracle industry in the sense that they may once have believed that. So in a sense, I think it's just a matter of the public starting to put this all together and put pressure on Congress.
The influence of the industry on American medicine is far too extensive, and we've been naive about it. And we need to separate them and be clear-eyed about what the motives of industry are and what our goals are as a people for our public health.
The relationship between physicians and the drug industry doesn't begin once you have your MD or you're out in private practice. It begins the day you hit medical school. Many medical students are given, quote, gifts on their very first day. It's interesting that those gifts are never things like a free dinner at a fancy restaurant or free tickets to a basketball game. They're not even pens or prescription pads. What they tend to be is things that look like they're about education. So they're a textbook or an ophthalmoscope that you can look through and say, oh my God, I'm going to be a doctor. And I think what that's about is establishing a relationship, establishing good feelings, and a dependency and a sense of entitlement. I work really, really hard and nobody else is really nice to me, but these guys are really nice to me. And at the same time, the notion that we're all in this together. We're on the same side, the side fighting against disease.
Unfortunately, the tactics used by the pharmaceutical salespeople rely on an entire system that is designed to manipulate what doctors understand about drugs. And basically, the salesperson is the last step in that. We also have to look at how clinical trials are designed and conducted. Right now, clinical trials are designed by the companies that are seeking to push a particular product in most cases. And unfortunately, they are frequently able to manipulate the design of the study or how the results are presented so that their drug comes out looking more favorable. That obviously is not a good way for us to accurately assess whether a drug is useful and safe.
Before 1980, most clinical research was funded by the National Institutes of Health. Academic researchers, quote, snubbed their noses at doing commercially funded research before 1980. When President Reagan came into office, the economy was slow, the ethos was small government, and the NIH funding of clinical studies went down dramatically. The drug companies were very happy to come in and lend a helping hand. Nothing much changed until 1991 because the studies were still being done in universities. But during the 90s, most of that research got pulled out of universities and was brought to for-profit research organizations. Now, nothing inherently unethical about that. It was more efficient and quicker for the drug companies. The problem is that gave virtual complete control over the research to the drug companies. They could design the studies. They have control of data so that many of the authors of the most important articles published in our best journals aren't even allowed to see their own data. They don't get free access to their own data. And they have control over publication. So the bottom line is that now 90% of clinical studies are funded by the drug companies. The odds are 5 times greater that commercially funded studies will support their products.
Suffice it to say that when drug companies set the research agenda, do the research and design the research, have tremendous influence over the people who get to write it up, and in fact have tremendous influence over the journals that publish it, because they're very, very beholden to drug companies for their own financial well-being, then it's not surprising that so much of what we think we are learning is tremendously distorted.
We have studies that are funded by drug companies, and there have been studies of those studies, and those studies of those studies repeatedly show a tremendous bias. They repeatedly show that they will be far more favorable for a drug if they're funded by drug companies. And we have studies showing that authors who write about these drugs, if they get money from the drug companies, they're going to write far more positive information than doctors, authors in medical journal articles who don't get money from the drug company. They may be right, they may not be right, but I'd rather hear it from somebody who isn't getting money from one side.
And more often than not, you can't get the data. I think it would be a major step forward if the drug companies who sponsor research made their data available to impartial scientists to make sure that the conclusions that have been drawn in the medical journals and that are driving our medical care really are supported by the research data. I mean, right now that data is treated like the recipe for Coke.
the data are so hidden and so complex, whether it's gene therapy or whether it's the number of people who die of heart attacks while taking Vioxx, we have to rely on researchers to provide us with that evidence. And I think the most shocking thing is to find that that evidence is simply not available, or it is distorted. And some of it is hidden as trade secrets. Federal trade secrets laws, commercial interests, allow drug companies to withhold some of this information. And I just recently found out, for example, that the Food and Drug Administration does not report all the deaths it knows about in patients who are on certain drugs, because these are considered federal trade secrets.
One of the problems in the drug industry is that studies are frequently either hard to find, or the results are manipulated by drug companies. We've certainly heard a lot about that in terms of Vioxx and the heart attack risk. But in the case of Nexium, those studies were printed and reproduced, the results, right in the package insert that the FDA requires accompany the drug in pharmacies. So these were not secret, but it's really fine print and not something that most consumers can understand, whereas the ubiquitous television ads touting the benefits of the so-called healing purple pill are very hard to miss. So this is a case where, I guess you could say it was hidden in plain sight.
The data that I found on the FDA's website showed for Vioxx that in the company's own study, in Merck's own study called the Vigor study, where Vioxx was compared to naproxen or Aleve sold over the counter, Vioxx is no more effective than Aleve. But the important thing is that the manufacturer's own data shows that Vioxx causes significantly more cardiovascular complications, heart attacks, blood clots, and strokes, more than Aleve. And overall, Vioxx is a more dangerous drug than Aleve. So that if I, as a family doctor, prescribed Vioxx for 100 patients in a row, within the next year there would be 2.5 serious complications because I treated those patients with Vioxx instead of Aleve. The New England Journal of Medicine article that was published in November of 2000 that was supposedly based on reporting that research failed to include those two crucial pieces of information.
We need to look at how clinical trials are designed and administered, but then we also need to look at how medical journals publish the results of clinical trials and other research. Right now, unfortunately, a lot of journal articles are written by physicians who either have a financial interest in the company and the product that they're writing about, or have a consulting arrangement. And frequently, journal articles are also written, ghost-written, by companies that basically do this as a business and then sign up a prominent doctor to put his or her name on the article.
There's a lot of evidence now that some of those articles aren't even written by those physicians, but are actually ghostwritten by the companies for the signature of the opinion leader in medicine, who gets the credit and also sometimes gets paid for an article that somebody else wrote.
And that gives a false credibility to the results and creates a very incorrect impression for the doctors and other medical professionals who might read the article and rely on it.
I saw an article in the New England Journal of Medicine in August of 2000 about Pravachol, which is a cholesterol-lowering drug, reducing the risk of stroke. And it seemed to be a biased article. So I went through it very carefully, and then I got in touch with a research expert in Boston to review my critique of the article with him to see if he agreed with me. So he went through it point by point and said, yes, he thought I was right. He didn't see anything wrong with my analysis. So I asked him if he would be interested in writing a paper with me. I thought it would be very powerful if a practicing family doctor and a research expert wrote a paper together to help to immunize practicing physicians from the growing commercialism in even our most respected journals. He said to me, well, I'd rather not. I do a little consulting for the drug companies, and I'd rather not get involved. And that really was a turning point for me, because I naively had believed that the universities were the overseers of the integrity of medical science and knowledge in general. And that showed me that there's enough drug influence in our best researchers so that the oversight function was no longer functioning. And then a year later, I saw a review article in the New England Journal again about Celebrex and Vioxx, and it seemed to be very clearly biased in favor of promoting those drugs. I noticed that both of the authors had financial ties to the drug companies, and at the time that was against the editorial policy of the New England Journal.
Now these journal articles are handed out by salespeople in doctors' offices. So now if they can't rely on the journal articles, they're even more hard-pressed to find out accurate drug information.
This transformation in the purpose of that knowledge has happened so quietly that the watchdogs not only haven't been able to keep up with it, but the watchdogs are largely drugged. So more than half of the budget of the division of the FDA that approves new drugs and oversees drug safety is funded by the drug companies. 90% of the clinical studies are funded by the drug companies. 59% of the experts who write the clinical guidelines that create imperatives for us to follow have an active financial relationship with a drug that's being considered in the guideline process. About 70% of our continuing medical education that doctors participate in to maintain their state licenses is funded by the drug companies. And we all know that there's now one drug rep for every 4.5 practicing doctors. So the drug companies are spending about $30,000 per doctor each year for marketing.
The pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of money on marketing. It's probably close to, in 2005, probably close to $20 billion.
It's well documented that the drug industry spends roughly twice on marketing what they spend on research and development. And this really demonstrates the drug industry's skewed priorities.
And though industry will say the marketing costs don't affect the cost of drugs, they do say the research costs affect the cost of drugs. So though I'm not an economist, I don't see how you can have one but not the other. And that in fact, just like the research costs may affect drug costs, I guess that marketing costs probably affect them too.
They're more interested in marketing drugs of questionable innovation to the American public than they are in researching genuinely innovative drugs that will be real breakthroughs for diseases that not just Americans but people all over the world are suffering from. So the fact that they spend twice as much on marketing as they do on research really undercuts their argument that they need the high prices that they force us to pay in order to somehow pay for all this supposedly innovative research that really isn't taking place.
First of all, they always claim that their prices have to be high because of all the research they do. Well, in truth, most of their research goes towards Me Too drugs. Those are drugs that just simply imitate other drugs that are already on the market that do the same thing. They're not saving lives. They're not changing things. They're just a different drug company trying to get a piece of the market.
The notion that we got to learn zillions of things because there are millions of journals being published every month is just not true. In fact, very little that comes out in the 30 years that I've been a doctor has really changed my practice, has really been important. There have been a few things, but you know what? It wasn't hard to know about those things. Those things were so dramatic that you couldn't help but learn about them.
Good example, the All-Hat study compared diuretics, fluid pills, which are very inexpensive, beta blockers, which are very inexpensive, and then 3 expensive classes of antihypertensive medications. Well, it turned out that the diuretic that cost only $30 to $50 a year was equal to or superior to all the other drugs in preventing the complications of high blood pressure. So the British Medical Journal published a wonderful article in which they interviewed a strategic marketing consultant for the drug companies, and the interviewer said, well, isn't this going to be a problem? Your expensive drug is not as good as a drug that costs $30 or $50 a year. And he said, no, this won't be a problem. We have a $10 billion industry. We'll have 55 promotional events, and this data will go away. It'll fade away. And I believe he was right. It did fade away.
And this is another thing that gets gross, is when they come out, because it's going to go off of patent, right? So it's going to be, a generic can be made. Well, they just switch the formula ever so slightly, so we get 3 more years of exclusivity to the drug, and we can still charge our premium prices.
Nexium, we have all seen the TV ads for. It's the so-called healing purple pill, and many people know that it is a successor to Prilosec, which was the original purple pill. The main difference between Nexium and Prilosec is the yellow stripes they added to Nexium and the price. Now Nexium is 7 times more expensive than Prilosec. The piece of information that AstraZeneca is not too anxious to publicize is that there is basically little or no medical difference between those 2 drugs. Basically, Nexium is a chemical mirror of the active ingredient of Prilosec. It's called an isomer. They've taken pains to try and portray it as though it's different, but they haven't really been able to do so. In fact, the main studies they did to demonstrate that it was somehow superior really didn't do a fair comparison. They compared a 40 milligram dose of Nexium to a 20 milligram dose of Prilosec. And even when they did that, the differences were really marginal at best, and in one of their studies, no difference at all. When they put them head-to-head, 20 milligrams of Nexium against 20 milligrams of Prilosec, there was no difference.
If they were to say, look, I'm making the 19th version of the same drug that never worked in the first place, we have older drugs that are even cheaper than all of them, and they're just as good, and what's more, it isn't even a disease, we're just making it up. Shyness is now social phobia or something like that. If they were to say that this is really just about making money, they wouldn't make a lot of money. So they're smart enough to know that the way to make money is to convince us. When I say us, I mean at all sorts of different levels, that this is really about a noble search for science and health.
Objective, cutting-edge science coming out of the top universities in this nation is often marketing dressed up as science. You know, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still marketing.
Supposedly the web opens up medical information so people can do their own research, but studies show that about 80% of the material that people find on the web about medical care is commercially motivated, whether or not it's identifiable as such.
And there are a number of groups on the internet that look like these bona fide, disinterested patient groups that would only want the best thing that's right for them, and you come to find out that they're 100% funded by a drug company.
Unfortunately, the FDA currently only requires, when you are seeking to have a new drug approved, that you show that that drug is better than a placebo. In other words, that the drug is better than nothing. That's really not very useful information for the doctor. They don't require that drugs be compared to each other. And that's a huge gap in our medical system. And other countries do require that drugs show that they're an improvement over what already exists, and do research to show how they stack up against each other. There are some publications and research institutions that are doing this kind of research. The biggest one, the most important right now, is the Drug Review Effectiveness Project at the Oregon Health Sciences University. And this basically is a meta-analysis where they collect all the different studies comparing drugs within a class to each other, and they make conclusions about how they stack up and which ones are really the most effective. Now, for consumers, much of that research gets distilled on a website done by Consumer Reports. It's called Best Buy Drugs, and they do essentially for drugs what they've done for years for refrigerators and vacuum cleaners and other products, which is tell you within a particular, say, group of heartburn drugs which one is the best buy, the most effective for the money. So things like that are really important resources. And that website for the Consumer Reports Best Buy Drugs is crbestbuydrugs.com.
Even when physicians could see through some of this stuff, even when they could say, you know, this isn't right, the drug companies would do an end run around the doctors and go straight to the patients with direct-to-consumer advertising. And patients would start demanding these drugs. And what they found was, I mean, a study clearly showed that when patients ask for a drug, doctors will often yield to that request, even when they know that's not always the best choice.
I had been in practice for 20 years. I closed my practice 10 years before, so all the patients in my practice I had been working with in a small town for at least 10 years. There were many of my own patients that I could not convince that these drugs weren't better. They would come in asking for Vioxx and Celebrex, and I would say, look, I know as much about this as anyone in the country who's not working in the drug companies, and these are not better drugs. And my patients would say, well, I saw them advertised, or even more emphatically, my friend had them prescribed by a specialist, implying you're just a family doctor. And many people said, if you don't prescribe them for me, I'll go to another doctor who will. And I could not convince people that I was looking at the original research and that it showed that the drugs were more dangerous.
The reason 20 million people took Vioxx and many similar millions took Celebrex was because of the advertising. It's because consumers saw Dorothy Hamill skating around on their televisions in those Vioxx ads we've all seen that so many people took Vioxx. So that's a perfect example of how drug advertising totally skewed what drugs people took and how much they paid. Because Vioxx was many more times more expensive than a bottle of ibuprofen, which for most people would have been just as effective, and not only would they not have paid more, they wouldn't have been at heightened risk for heart attacks.
If there's anything in American or Western society that sort of dominates our cultural life, it's advertising. Advertising costs millions of dollars for the Super Bowl for a minute. And the reason it does is because it works. Because by spending a few $1,000,000 on advertising, you make billions of dollars. And the drug industry is very good at advertising.
The ads are so beautifully designed to create an emotional connection and a sense of needing these drugs that they really capture a lot of people's interest.
God, you can name all these drugs nowadays. You would never... 10 years ago, you couldn't name, unless you were prescribed that prescription, you could not name a drug. And now you could name 10 off the top of your head. Isn't that crazy?
There is evidence that the best advertised drugs to consumers are the best sellers. No surprise.
So drug advertising is really skewing the market and how much we pay. It's not going to go away. I think that's very unlikely, but it needs to be much more strictly regulated.
When President Bush first came into office, there wasn't an FDA commissioner, and he appointed Daniel Troy to be the chief counsel of the FDA. And one of the first things he did was make a rule that all of the advertising infractions that had been responded to in a matter of days previously, because the committee that looks at them, the division that looks at them, would send out warning letters or sanction letters, all of those problems would have to come to his office, and the delay in sending out warning letters, meaning protecting the public from ads that cross the line, that in some way misrepresent the drug or overstate the drug's benefit or understate the risks, was grossly delayed.
Right now, the FDA does not require drug companies to submit television ads or any other drug ads before they air. They only have to submit them after the fact. So the ad will already be on TV or in a magazine, and the FDA, if it eventually gets around to doing something about an ad it considers deceptive, may be too late. Representative Henry Waxman has done studies about how long it takes the FDA to act on deceptive advertising, and there are very lengthy delays. Usually 4 to 6 months, I think, is the average. By 4 to 6 months, many of these ads have stopped running. The damage is done. The expression is closing the barn door after the horse is gone. Well, the FDA is, at best, shutting the barn door halfway after the horse is long gone. So we need better enforcement by the FDA of direct-to-consumer advertising, and we also need more disclosure within drug ads of exactly what the drug is for, what its risks are, who it should be used by, and basically fuller information so that people can make an intelligent choice. Right now, drug ads are basically a shameless promotion with a little bit of risk information at the end that frequently people don't understand, or that's obscured by graphics, sounds, things going on in the commercial that make it hard for people to take in that drug information.
I think it's really short-sighted to think that this is a matter of bad drug companies or bad people pulling things over on us. They're doing what they're supposed to do. If we want it to be different, we have to insist on it. And the ways in which we insist on it is multi-pronged, but it includes our government. Of course it does. Right now, our government is not terribly interested in making any reforms that would be useful because they're very beholden to the drug companies. If we want to change that, we have to make them beholden to us. We have to have the clout and the influence in the organization to make it that they can't blithely go along making the FDA be something that has been widely and famously called a servant of the drug industry.
Up until recently, the commercials you saw on TV were very disease and drug related. You'd see somebody in a park who had arthritis learning how to do Tai Chi, and the thought was that if you took that drug you could do Tai Chi when just 3 weeks before you were all tight with arthritis.
If you have osteoarthritis, you owe it to yourself to learn about Celebrex.
Today you'll see a commercial that's very, very different. It's very personal and it's trying to be very warm.
We started working on a new heart medicine in 1982. It took 15 years to complete all the tests and find the exact right compound. When we started, my son was in diapers. When we finished, he was in high school.
Mainly a PR push to kind of justify the profits that they're making and the prices that they charge.
GlaxoSmithKline. Today's medicines finance tomorrow's miracles.
Whenever the industry is attacked or criticized,
what they say is that we produce the miracles that save lives. We put all this money into research and development, and we come up with these wonderful new products. And if you give us a hard time, essentially, if you try to exercise judgment about which products to buy, if you try to negotiate for better prices, if you create a public system that in any way disadvantages us, then we will stop producing these new drugs. And that's been a very, very potent argument because it's scary. I mean, people, are terrified of Alzheimer's disease, they're terrified of cancer, and they really want to believe that there will be, that cures will keep coming.
We spend over $2 billion a year on research. That's why we believe we'll introduce more new medicines for more diseases than anyone else. At Pfizer, we're not just looking for cures for the future. We're going to find them.
Industry will tell you that one of the reasons why their drugs are expensive, at least is what they'll say, is that R&D costs are so high. Well, if that's true, another one of the reasons for the drugs being expensive has to be that promotional costs are so high. I don't think you can have one or not the other.
If you look at the tax filings of the largest pharmaceutical corporations, you will find that more money is taken in profits than is devoted to research and development, and a great deal more money goes into marketing and administration than into research and development.
It is a free market society, and I think that everybody should be able to create something, market it, and sell it within the limits of the law. But when you're looking at an industry that's being protected by our government and giving tax exemptions by our government, and they're not being held accountable, and they're being able to charge whatever they want. The price of drugs today has less to do with how much it costs to bring to market. It has to do solely with how much the market will bear.
What the industry has done in response to this and the declining esteem in which it's held by the public is to just do more of the same old, to put more money into marketing, to put more money into lobbying, to put more money into political campaigns. But we're running out of ways to pay for these drugs, and sooner or later, something's going to have to give.
Get the major statement about risks, you get an incomplete picture of the drugs. These drugs are not as safe or effective as the ads suggest they are.
According to Otis Lee Elliott's cardiologist, it's not his high cholesterol that put him in the hospital, it's the medicine he took to lower it.
Adverse drug reactions that happen even though the medication has been properly prescribed, are the 5th leading cause of death in the United States.
In fact, each year in the United States, adverse drug reactions cause an estimated 100,000 deaths and approximately 1.5 million hospitalizations. The withdrawal of the popular painkiller Vioxx from the market is a salient example of the magnitude of this problem.
Merck said today that data from a clinical trial found an increased risk for heart attack and stroke.
The arthritis drug may have caused 160,000 heart attacks and strokes.
20 million Americans took Vioxx.
Vioxx relieves arthritis pains.
Often, some say, unnecessarily, in response to advertising.
Vioxx is a superb example of what happens when you over-promote a drug, when doctors especially over-prescribe a drug as a concept of promotion and give it to people who it's not indicated for, who they could have been given very cheap older drugs which would have been worked just as well. And then because the drug's only out for a few years, you then discover when it's used in lots and lots of people that it has side effects, some of them fatal, that you didn't know about.
Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Vioxx.
And in 2000, more
One of the facts of American life these days is that many prescription drugs are now household names.
Both doctors and the public want to reach for the newest prescription drug.
You can't sit down to TV at night and not see a half a dozen drug company commercials.
Millions of Americans watch the ads and then ask their doctors for prescriptions.
The reason we're seeing so much consumer advertising is because it works.
They do it by telling people, ask your doctor.
They can sell us almost anything.
The companies that make up the pharmaceutical industry are among the largest corporations in the world. In 2004, their combined global sales were over $500 billion. The most vital question for American consumers is this: how might the influence of one of the most powerful for-profit industries in the world affect the way we think about our health and well-being?
With Celebrex, I will play the long version.
Ask your doctor if Celebrex is right for you.
As these pharmaceutical companies move prescription drugs into the consumer arena, as they become consumer products, they advertise them quite differently. And what they do is rely on all the same practices and conventions of conventional product advertising.
It's so good to have my enthusiasm back.
I'm enjoying things again. And it's because of Enro.
They began trying to create brand identities for these products. What branding is about is trying to create an emotional bond between a consumer and a product, which is a very different kind of relationship than we've ever had to our medications before.
Any doctor can tell you about patients that come in with a list of medications that they want. They clearly all came from advertisement that they see on TV. And if you watch the evening news, for example, it's all advertisement for prescription drugs.
What's the weekend hold in store for you? Ask your doctor if a free sample of prescription Cialis is right for you.
The patients
$1 trillion, with Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson leading the pack. Together, these businesses have come to be known as Big Pharma. In the U.S., the core of Big Pharma's immense profits is from sales of prescription medication. And since these drugs can only be prescribed by medical professionals, most of the industry's promotional and marketing activities are directed at doctors, pharmacists, and other healthcare providers. The companies of Big Pharma hope these campaigns will lead to new prescriptions for their brands. In recent years, Big Pharma has pushed its way into the traditional doctor-patient relationship and found a new way to increase sales by targeting patients directly and independently, largely through television advertising.
Do you know about the purple pill called Nexium?
I know.
I know.
You should know about it too.
Between 1996 and 2004, industry spending on direct-to-consumer advertising, or DTC, rose over 500%. Now, even before walking into their doctor's offices, patients have already been exposed to millions of dollars worth of persuasive advertising that encourages them to ask their doctor how a particular brand of drug might help them.
Ask your doctor about adding Plavix.
Ask your doctor if Zelnorm is right for you.
Ask your doctor if a free sample of Viagra is right for you.
I asked my doctor about Lipitor. Have you?
In this new landscape,
come in asking for things they don't even know what it's for, right? Women who are coming in asking for Cialis or Viagra or other things, and they don't even know what they're for.
So this becomes not a rational reason for taking a medication. This is not so much about the efficacy of the drug, but about our emotional response to the kinds of social meanings they have attached to that product.
Join the millions of people with asthma who have discovered Singulair.
I just want to play. Play!
You have these ads that are sort of ephemeral kind of images unfolding before you. And to me, they seem like perfume ads or sort of something that's all about image, that's all about emotional impact.
Most of what you get in these ads are these incredibly compelling lifestyle portraits of people who are living healthy, vibrant lives thanks to pharmaceuticals. You don't really ever see the medical condition represented. You don't see people suffering from the ailment that they supposedly suffer from. You see them restored to health after they've taken the chemical.
The pleasing tones and images of these ads are often at odds with the less pleasurable list of side effects that companies by law are required to recite.
Side effects include itching, rash, diarrhea, and bruising.
Dry mouth, sweating, nausea,
headache, flu, runny nose, and ear infection.
If you take Wellbutrin XL, there is a risk you may have a seizure.
Erections lasting longer than 4 hours, though rare, require immediate medical help.
So I think one of the things that gets misrepresented by these ads is the safety of the drugs. While you